Everything you've ever been told about Malbec is wrong. What if I told you that Malbec is actually not from Argentina, but is actually from the Bordeaux region of France? And not all Malbecs are big and inky. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they taste like black plum and cocoa, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they taste like cherry and peppercorn and wet stone in a good way. Malbec, like many grapes, takes on its terroir. So if it's cooler versus if it's warmer, if it rains more or less, the Malbec is going to taste different. And I've got two American Malbecs today that we're going to open up and try together to really explain how Malbec takes on different flavors depending on where it's from. And not all Malbec tastes like Malbec. This is the American Wine Rebel Show, where we dive into the history of American wine and uncover American wine's best-kept secrets. I'm Meg Siobhan, and I hope you poured yourself a glass of something good because I don't like drinking alone. So the two bottles I have here today are from opposite sides of the United States. So this first bottle of Malbec that we have is from Gilbert Cellars. This one is from Horse Heaven Hills, which is a sub-AVA of the Columbia Valley. And this tends to be a warmer region. It doesn't get a ton of rain, like maybe 6 to 8 inches a year. And this is going to produce what is maybe closer to what we think of as a typical Malbec. And before moving to our next bottle, I do want to just give a shout out for Gilbert Cellars. So this bottle here is from 2019 and they have since rebranded. And I like the mountains on this one, but I love their new branding so much. So I will drop a picture of it here. But definitely check them out. Their new branding is so fun. And I picked up this bottle here for about $32 at my local wine shop. And the second Malbec that we have here is from Benmarl in New York. And this winery here is from the Hudson Valley in New York. Benmarl specifically has one of the oldest vineyards in the United States. And Hudson Valley is an area that they've been growing grapes for a while, but it's not as famous as maybe some other regions like the Finger Lakes in New York. But this bottle here is from 2023. And this is going to be a little bit different of an expression of Malbec than maybe what most people are used to. And this bottle here, I did buy directly at the winery when I was there, and it was about $45. So not too much of a difference in these two bottles price-wise. I also do love that they both have mountains on them because they're from both mountainous regions, but on the East Coast versus on the West Coast. But these bottles are going to taste so different. At least I think they will, but we will crack into them here in just a minute. But first, let's talk about the history of Malbec and how it even ended up here in the United States. So Malbec is originally from France, in southwestern France. It was one of the main blending grapes that was used in Bordeaux. And it was also grown a lot in a region called Cahors, which is inland from Bordeaux. And it's still widely grown in Cahors, but it's not as common in Bordeaux today. And there's a main reason for that. So in 1956, there was a major frost that happened in Bordeaux, and it killed off almost all of the Malbec grapes. But some of the other grapes, particularly Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, survived the frost a lot better. So since those grapes were tougher, they kind of took over and were planted more in Bordeaux than Malbec. There still is Malbec in Bordeaux today, and it can still be part of some of the Bordeaux blends, but it's just not as common. It is still very common in Cahors, though, where the blends there have to be made up of a minimum 70% Malbec. So definitely lots of Malbec there. It's going to be a bit more tannic, though, than what we would expect from like a juicy, inky, plush Argentinian style Malbec. So how did it end up in Argentina? So in the 1950s, the governor of Mendoza, Domingo Faustino Sarmiento, wanted some French grapes to be planted in Argentina. And so he reached out to a Frenchman by the name of Michel-Aimé Pouzet and asked him to bring some French grapes to Argentina. And so one of the ones that he brought was Malbec. And he planted Malbec in Argentina, and it was thriving. Malbec did so well in the hot climates in the Andes Mountains. There wasn't too much rain. It had a great diurnal shift, which meant it got hot during the day and cool at night, so the grapes could ripen, but not get too ripe. And it was doing super well, and the wine it was making was really good. But for a while, Argentina wasn't exporting a ton of wine, and so they were making this great Malbec, but a lot of other people weren't finding out about it. And then in 2012, their Malbecs won some major global awards and they started exporting Malbec. And today, Malbec is basically synonymous with Argentinian wine. But the style that most people expect to get from Argentina and when they think Malbec are these big, plush, inky, really jammy, fruity, not super high in tannin red wines. But they're inky, they're dark in color, and there's a very specific profile. It's one of those grapes that I feel like you either love it or you hate it. But that's not the only way that Malbec has to taste. And so Malbec was actually brought to the United States around the same time as the other Bordeaux varieties in the 1900s, but it didn't become super popular. And then when Prohibition hit, it wiped out a lot of the grapes that were being grown, including Malbec. And it wasn't until the 1990s and the 2000s that people started drinking all these great Argentinian Malbecs, and they started asking for Malbec. So some of the major wine producers in the US started planting and making wine with the Malbec grape. And a few of the areas that Malbec can really be found today are Washington's Columbia Valley, which this Gilbert Cellars bottle is from. And then Paso Robles in California, it's a bit more of a spicy Malbec typically. But then in Colorado in the Grand Valley as well, there's some really good Malbec. And then some other little pockets, the Texas High Plains, and different other regions throughout the US. But since every region in the US has a different climate, different soils, different growing conditions, the Malbec is going to taste a little bit different. And they don't all taste like Argentinian Malbec. So to taste some of the Malbecs that we have here, let's crack into our first bottle. So I already introduced this one here, the Gilbert Cellars. It is from the Columbia Valley in Washington, specifically Horse Heaven Hills. And Horse Heaven Hills is a very sunny region. It gets over 300 days of sun. It doesn't get a ton of rain, like I said, about 6 to 8 inches a year. And its growing temperatures typically are between like 70 and 75 degrees, but can get up to like 90 degrees in the summer. So it gets warm. But one of the things that is specifically interesting about Horse Heaven Hills is the wind. So there's a lot of winds that sweep through the area off of the Cascade Mountains, and this keeps away fungus, but it also cools down the grapes. So even on those hot, sunny days, they don't get overheated and start to burn. And I'm going to pour this now, and I can see, even as I'm pouring this, just how dark and purple this is. Look at that. This is inky looking, which is such a classic descriptor of Malbec. It is opaque. If I put my fingers below the glass here, I can't see them through it. It's very pretty. It's that purpley color that is very characteristic of Malbec. And Malbec wines, or Malbec grapes, I should say, have thick skins. Which typically leads to darker colored wines because it's the skins on the grape that give the wine its color. So Malbec has that thick purple skins, and so the wine is going to be very dark and purpley. So this has those black cherry, black plum, cocoa notes to it that is very characteristic of Malbec. This is a bit more structured than I was maybe expecting. It does have a little bit of that tannin there, which makes sense with the thicker skins with the grape. But it's still very, it's got those plush blackberry, black cherry notes to it. It's got a little bit of white pepper and almost like some tobacco to it as well. So overall, it's got a lot going on in it. It's pretty powerful. But a lot of the flavor notes in this are what is expected with a Malbec. those dark fruits, the tobacco, cocoa, even a little bit of that pepper to it are typical Malbec notes. So we can compare Columbia Valley in Washington to Uco Valley in Argentina, which is one of the most famous Malbec producing regions. And both valleys have hot summers, long growing seasons. They don't get too much rainfall, but there are some differences as well. So Uco Valley is going to be higher elevation. And so the grapes are going to be grown at a higher elevation. They're going to get more direct sun. And Columbia Valley, specifically Horse Heaven Hills, because it's known for its wind, that actually contributes to how the wine ultimately tastes. So when wind is blowing through a valley, the grapes respond in a couple ways. So typically they don't get quite as big when there's less rainfall, and when there's a lot of wind, the grapes are smaller. So the berries do tend to be smaller here in Horse Heaven Hills, but the wind itself also, it impacts the grapes. So the grapes have to become tougher to withstand the wind and not get damaged by the wind. And so in order to do that, they form thicker skins. So Malbec already has thick skins, but these berries are smaller to begin with, and then they're forming even thicker skins. So there's higher skin to juice ratio in the wine, and they've got these extra thick skins, and that's what's contributing to the tannin here. And so that's why this is going to have a little bit higher tannin than something we might expect from Argentina, but still a lot of the classic Malbec flavors. But even though when we think Malbec, a lot of times we associate it with Argentina, so we associate it with hot climates, almost desert-like climates, that's not the only place Malbec can grow. And so that's why I think this Malbec here from Benmarl in New York is so interesting, because this is such a different climate. It's cooler, which means that the grapes likely won't ripen quite as much, and it gets a ton of rain. We're talking like upwards of 40 inches of rain a year compared to the 6 to 8 that we're getting here in the Columbia Valley. So the grapes here are a lot more likely to get disease, and so the wine growers have to really manage that. There's not the wind that we had before. The growing season is just shorter, so it's more likely to frost in the spring or get too cool in the fall. So the grapes have to be picked a little bit earlier. And typically with wines, when grapes don't get quite as ripe, they're going to have higher acidity and some lower tannin. So I'm excited to crack this one open and see how it compares to our Washington Malbec. Okay, so right off the bat, this does not even look like a Malbec. So I need to do a little side by side here. Okay, so whereas this Washington Malbec is the typical big, inky, purpley Malbec color, this New York Malbec here, it's pale in comparison. It's like a medium color intensity here. I can definitely see my fingers through it. It is not quite as purpley as I was expecting, and maybe it's because I don't have a white surface underneath this glass here. It is still kind of like a reddish purple, but it's not purple. And it's shockingly light in color, which makes sense. If there's not as much sun exposure, the skins are less likely to get as thick. And when there's more rainfall, the berries, the grapes themselves, are likely to get bigger because the plant is getting watered more, so the berries grow more. And so I don't know for sure with this particular vineyard because I haven't seen the grapes here, but there's a chance that because there's more rainfall, the grapes are just going to be bigger. They're going to be juicier. And so there is a lower skin to juice ratio in this wine. But let's give this a smell. Okay, so I'm not getting any dark fruit here. I'm getting red cherry, red plum, some herbal notes. This doesn't smell like a Malbec. This is wild. This has bright acidity. It's got some minerally notes to it, in addition to that like sour cherry, tomato leaf, still a little bit of that white pepper there. But if you put this in front of me, I would not have guessed that this was a Malbec. These two wines here could not be so different from each other. And that's what's crazy about just growing conditions and terroir and winemaking. And so this one's fun. Here, I would say if anyone gets a chance to try the Malbec from Benmarl or any other cool climate region that's experimenting with this lighter, more acid-driven, zippy, dare I say chillable Malbec style, I would definitely recommend giving that a try, especially if you're not someone who typically likes Malbec. But to take a step back from this, I think this is a perfect case study of not judging a wine by its wine name. And I hear all the time, as someone who talks a lot and educates a lot about wine, and people say, oh, I don't like insert specific type of grape. And I think this is a perfect example that grapes don't have just one flavor, but they're also a mirror of where they come from, how they're grown, the style of wine they're made into. And so this is why I love trying wines from all over the world, but all over the United States as well. And a lot of times I think we get so stuck up on the same few regions and producers that we drink all the time, and it's not our own fault. A lot of wine stores and restaurant wine menus carry the same 8 to 10 wines all the time, and it's hard to go out there and seek out different things. But it's so important to do that. And it's so fun to do that because that's where you discovered things like 2 very different regions of the United States in this case that are just different expressions. And I just think it's so fun. And Malbec has had such a journey all over the world, from France to finding its home in Argentina to giving Malbec the chance to be experimented with in different regions across the United States now with different flavor profiles. So thanks for joining me on this Malbec journey here. I would love to know your thoughts. If you're a Malbec fan, or what you think of these 2 different styles here from these 2 different producers. If you've enjoyed this wine journey here, be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, follow me on Instagram at American Wine Rebel, and come back next week for another wine chat. I know soon here it's going to be Beaujolais Nouveau Day, so we will definitely have to do an episode on that. But we'll be talking about all different types of wine. So if there's anything in particular you want to chat about, be sure to drop it in the comments. And until next time, cheers!